What's up, everybody? Thanks for being with us here for a Tuesday edition of the Slate, otherwise known as the countdown for Koff leaving to go to the Revolution game. Who wants to talk soccer, huh? Major League Soccer. Let's get into that.
Do it.
Eastern Conference. Garion's into it. Chirag's into it. Thanks for being with us.
Man, they are the home field advantage points leaders in the league. What is going on?
This is what I'm talking
about. Football team and a football team going live.
I don't know what's happening. I do know I can go out on my balcony and see BMO Field where TFC plays, but that's about all I know about the MLS.
No, actually, the only thing I know is because I went to the game on Sunday of the Patriots, and they were like hyped up about how the Rev were going to be playing there as well on Tuesday today, right?
Yeah, tonight.
Yeah. So the crowd was hype about that too. So that's where I got my information. I didn't really actually know any of that. I just listened.
Man, I could tell you, MLS leaders, like you said, historic 73-point season, not just the best in Revs history, the best in MLS history. It's the Eastern Conference semifinals tonight against New York City FC. Let's go. It's going to be a great time. Going to be a lot of fun. I'm sure a lot of DK people are going to be there too, because as you noted, Chirag, it's in the area. But what we're going to do tonight here for the next, 45 minutes, however long we're all together, Chirag, Hira, Garion, Thorne, Adam Kaufman. We're going to talk a little bit about the hardwood, the association. Then we can, if people want to, if you have any questions, by all means, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, submit them. We'll get into them. If you want to talk football or hockey or golf or whatever it is a little bit later on, baseball, free agency, we can do it. We're happy to do it. But primarily, we're going to be basketball, even though, fellas, it is a lighter slate. It's a 5-game slate tonight in the NBA, but some very interesting things to watch over the course of the next couple hours, obviously, until lock. Now, I think let's start right here. We can go game by game, and I guess if we're going to do that, we'll go in reverse order, because this is one of the later games tonight, guys. And that is the Blazers contest. They are home 10 o'clock Eastern time against the Pistons. Now, Detroit, not a good team, losers of 6 in a row, not a good team in general, be it home, road, anywhere. 4-16 overall. And Frank Jackson, he's questionable with a shin injury. Of course, Kelly Olynyk remains out in that one. The Blazers side, though, is far more interesting. You've got a team here that 9-1 at home, despite 3 straight losses overall. 9-1 at home, again, shaping up to be 10-1. Even without, this is where it gets, a little bit more compelling. No Damian Lillard. He's not going to play in this one, just rest, going to give him a night. How much, Garion, we'll start with you, does this become a Blazers stack potentially tonight?
I mean, really, I think you can look at it from both sides. Not that, the Blazers are necessarily in that class of team where I'm like, oh, wow, they're going to wipe the floor with the Pistons. This could get lopsided. Rotations could get screwed up. But I think you could even start looking at the Pistons, someone like Jeremy Grant, who's right in that 7K mid-tier. Cade Cunningham could also kind of fill this void, although he's been a little shaky from a DFS perspective as of late. But this probably becomes a much more competitive game. So I think both sides become a little bit more interesting. But as you alluded to, Koff, the value is obviously opened up on the Blazers side of things. And I think most people are going to fall to 2 guys in particular, that being CJ McCollum, who his usage rate skyrockets when Damian Lillard is not on the court, not to mention that Norman Powell will also not be playing in this game. And then you've got Anthony Simons, who's coming off arguably his 2 best games of the season so far. He's a high usage player, someone who's probably going to now see over 30 minutes in this contest, could draw a spot start. I'm not saying you can't play these guys, but I'm just saying this is where the obvious ownership is now going to trend towards. And I think Simons in particular at around $4,000, it's hard to ignore him. He's a fantastic play considering his ceiling, but maybe you do try to take a chance on some of the other members of this rotation. I mean, it's very hard to look at the rest of the Blazers as currently constructed and find someone you really want to use. I mean, you look at even just who they're probably going to turn to as another starting option in this game, it's probably going to be Tony Snell. Like, I don't really want to use Tony Snell, even at the minimum, but someone like Yusuf Nurkic, I'm very intrigued by. And maybe, I know we're not really seeing anyone, this is more guard-centric than it is forward-centric, but Nurkic has been an animal recently. His last 6 games, he's averaging 1.44 DraftKings points per minute played, but the issue is he's playing closer to 20 minutes than 30 minutes per game so far this season. So someone like that going up against the Pistons have the lowest total rebounding rate in the NBA. So Nurkic could really control the glass. maybe this is a situation where the Blazers have to turn to someone like Nurkic for more time than they would normally give him, maybe 30, 32 minutes, because they need a little scoring punch now that they're missing Damian Lillard and Norman Powell. So I think you can try to get a little creative with this by stacking some other members of the Blazers and maybe even the Pistons, as opposed to just automatically sticking McCollum and Simons into a lineup.
Chirag, projected ownership tonight for some of these Blazers players that obviously Garion was just talking about with some of the info that I'm looking at here. So Nurkic, almost 50% projected ownership, and he is, looking at potentially, even likely, north of 40 fantasy points. CJ McCollum, projected ownership for him is about 45%. Larry Nance Jr., who I don't think Garion mentioned, about 32-ish% of lineups. And then Anthony Simons, who of course Garion started with, 68% of lineups. How much do you feel like you either need to, it's sort of that I don't know, chicken and egg debate of like, or I don't know, whatever the words I'm looking for here, in terms of whether you or not you feel like you need to lock these guys in because they're going to be the plays tonight, I have to have them, versus the alternative of, if I want differentiation, maybe I need to stay away from these guys.
Well, it really depends on your lineup build. So we have an opportunity with Nurkic at 6,400 that you don't have to slot him into the center spot being in the late game. So you can play him as a utility and maybe run someone else in the center spot as well. So it really depends on that lineup construction. I was also interested in Dennis Smith Jr. Yes, he's at $3,000, and there's an opportunity for DSJ to pick it up a little bit. Yeah, he's not the most dynamic scorer currently the way that his game has been lately, but if he gets over 25 minutes at 3K, like that opens it up a little bit, because you don't know how much you're going to have to spend up, and you might need that $1,000 savings. Whereas if Anthony Simons scores 30 fantasy points and DSJ scores 22 to 25, and it's what's the difference? $1,000? That makes a big difference. So I think the pivot there in that game is DSJ. And that's kind of where I'm looking if trying to build a contrarian lineup. So when I'm building my lineups, I like to go with two lineups actually. And one is kind of like the chalkier, more popular plays. And the reason for that is the NBA is kind of a sport where popular plays pop off because they can get rebounds, steals, points, blocks, whatever. And then another lineup where it's like, I want DSJ. I want these. If this happens, then this happens. So like if somebody gets into foul trouble, then this happens. So I try to play the if then, all right, this is kind of my hedge to my main lineup, and then play it that way. And that's where I would differentiate with DSJ.
Just looking at Dennis Smith Jr.'s game log too, and obviously there are plenty of games as you noted that, he might only play 3-4 minutes, but when he's out there in a night like tonight, potentially without Damian Lillard, without Norman Powell, if he gives you at least, let's say, 19 minutes plus this year, he has gone for at minimum 15 fantasy points and up to, low 20s. So Garion, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, look, I think he's definitely a variance play, and he's someone who you can probably pencil in for, like you guys are saying, 20 to 25 minutes in this contest. I don't need to tell anybody this, but revenge game. So, that
I forgot about
really
that.
elevates things. DSJ he's a high variance player. Even when he was in a major role in Dallas and in Detroit, he was a high variance player. So you're always banking on that upside. And I do think he could be a very good play, because I think a lot of people will just see Simons, that 4,000, and think, well, if there couldn't possibly be a better value option on this team, and it very well could be DSJ. It's just kind of interesting. I look at this game and I look at Toronto-Memphis, and just two games that, this is the big Tuesday slate with all the star power. We've got the nationally televised games, the one non-nationally televised game that, still involves the Lakers. So these are kind of like the black sheep of this particular slate, but these two games just involve four teams that are both going through, or all four are going through, some version of injury struggles. None of the four teams play defense. So it really wouldn't shock me if these are the two games that you kind of have to pick your way through and find the value, because they're probably going to be the highest scoring games on the slate.
It's not a value situation here, Chirag, with CJ McCollum, obviously. But again, without Damian Lillard, this guy, as we know, any night, whether Lillard's out there or not, he's a lock, a virtual lock for 30 fantasy points. He averages closer to 35, 36. And this just, it sets up as an opportunity, you would think, to maybe have that first 50-point night of the season, or I don't know if it's first, but one of his first,
second,
obviously.
Second. He had one opening night against
so
Kings.
he's gone into the 40s, a few times, but generally he's living in that mid to high 30s, obviously. Is this a game that you lock him in for 45 plus?
It's difficult to lock anybody, but when you're playing against a poor defensive team like the Pistons and you're missing a high usage player like Damian Lillard, he's going to McCollum can easily take on the point guard responsibilities. So it's difficult to say anybody's a lock. And at 7,900, you need those 45 fantasy points. So I just think that there are a lot of guard options on this slate that you really still have to consider. I mean, you have a player in Steph Curry that's on this slate playing at 11,400, and you know how well he's been playing, but at the same time, 11,400 means you need 60 fantasy points. Devin Booker, player of the week, coming off multiple back-to-back-to-back 30-point games, playing extremely well in one of the higher totals. The last time the Lakers and Kings played, you had triple overtime, and you still have guards that are options there. So I think with Russell Westbrook, easily could drop a triple-double on the Kings. So there's a lot of options to do here, and I think that's where with such a short slate, like being a little different, sure, you can get your 45 points, but like if you're going to play Simons, Nurkic, and McCollum, and maybe run it back from somebody on the Detroit side, you're really limiting your lineup.
Before we go off of this game, we can bounce around, obviously, in the next half hour or so that we're here. But I know there are interesting games elsewhere to get into. But we've been looking at and showing people on the screen some of the DFS side of things for that first game that we were getting into there with the Blazers, again, without Lillard, without Powell, and obviously pretty much everything is status quo on the Pistons side of things. But what about Sportsbook? If you're looking at making a bet on tonight, especially as it relates to player props, and I'm sure some lines have moved quite a bit over the course of the day since we got the Lillard news, but anything, Garion, jump out at you?
I haven't really dug into too many of the props yet. I can do that in just a second. But
sure.
I would say, as I sort of alluded to earlier, this total right now is set at just 210 points. And yes, the Blazers defense has been much better when they've been playing at home. Yes, you would be right to question just the efficiency and the trustworthiness of Detroit's offense. But Jeremy Grant has been playing and scoring much better as of late. I just think that number is pretty low for two teams that have struggled to play defense so far this season. I know Damian Lillard is a huge part of what the Blazers do on offense. I know Norman Powell has been a very efficient scorer the last 18 months. But again, I just don't trust either of these defenses. So if I can take the over 210, I think I'm willing to dip in at that number.
Chirag?
I like Yusuf Nurkic's points prop. It's set at 15.5, minus 105. He scored over this amount 3 straight games. Now with Powell and Lillard out, I don't see how he doesn't get there. Potential here also, Garion mentioned the rebounding stats for the Pistons being towards the bottom of the league. You have an option where you can even consider Nurkic for the double-double prop. That's sitting at, minus 120. So the chances of him getting a double-double is sitting at minus 120. So maybe is there something to look at in the rebounds department? Maybe there's something to look at in the points, rebounds, assist breakdown. Right here we have 11.5 as his rebounds prop. So this is setting up for a big Nurkic night, and I think it's the best value comes in on his points.
All right, let's make a move over to certainly maybe not the most compelling game of the night with regard to these question marks and finding value in DFS. That's probably the Portland side of things like we talked about. But in terms of just the game of the night as a basketball fan, without question, obviously, we're talking Warriors Suns, the top two teams that are in the West there in the NBA and the NBA in general, not just the West standings. You got Golden State 18-2, even as shorthanded as the Warriors have been throughout this year. Looking like Steph and company, they are back very much so. 7-1 away, winners of 7 straight, and pretty much have their lineup intact. Damian Lee is probable. On the Phoenix side, 17-3, the Suns this year, 8-2 at home. They have won their last 16 games, just outrageous. And the only potential question here, or known commodity, I should say, is Frank Kaminsky being out. But other than that, you're getting what you're getting here, which is star power on both sides. Of course, Klay Thompson, as people know, is not ready yet to return to Golden State, but to this point, haven't needed him just yet. So what's the outlook, Chirag, going right back to you on this game, and what jumps out at you, whether you want to start sports betting or obviously DFS?
I just think that there's value here in running the Warriors money line. Yeah, the Suns have been on a massive winning streak and they're at home, but if you don't feel comfortable the money line saying an outright win, I think that this is going to be a 1 possession game going down to the wire. So +3 makes sense to me as well.
Garion?
Yeah, this was a game that, I'll be honest, I wasn't super into from a DFS capacity. I just think there's better value elsewhere. Obviously, you can never look at, a game that Steph Curry's in and say, I don't want to partake in this. But the Suns, they tend to run like a very socialist offense. I mean, between Booker and Paul and Ayton, everyone just kind of gets theirs. And then you've got Bridges who works his way in, and same with Crowder. It's not a team where I think you go 50 DKFP hunting all that often, and they tend to be priced up because they are as good as they are. Whereas with the Warriors, every night there's a slate that involves Steph Curry. You have to start that night by asking yourself, is this a night where I'm playing Steph Curry? And generally speaking, you answer yes. I'll find a way to make it work. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Steph isn't viable tonight. He is, but I think I'm looking to build more from like the upper mid tier, a more balanced approach tonight. I just think that's the way it opens up based upon who's in and who's out. But I will say, with the news we got around 3:30 that Andrew Wiggins moved from, not on the injury report to suddenly being questionable with a back injury. I mean, this is a Warriors team that's 18-2. Obviously, they want to win this game, but they've got bigger fish to fry. Back injuries are notoriously like nagging and worrisome. So I do think just with his late addition to the injury report, we could be looking at Wiggins not playing in this game. And that would open up value for someone like Jordan Poole, who would sure to see a usage increase. He's below 7K on this slate. Even someone like Otto Porter. I think if Wiggins is ruled out, Porter would immediately become someone a lot of people would be drawn to just because he's played as well as he's played in his last 4 games. But he's only $4,400. He's got positional versatility, so he really does fit into your lineup in a bunch of different ways. But again, as Chirag sort of alluded to earlier, when it came to where you're putting Nurkic into a lineup, whether it be your center slot or your utility slot, you really have to make an effort with some of these Warriors guys to make sure they're in the guard, forward, or utility slots, depending on what happens with Andrew Wiggins and whether or not he's ruled in or out.
So it's interesting, guys, again, looking at some ownership projections for tonight for a DFS side, like I said. So it looks like as of right now, barring obviously changes between now and lock, which is certainly possible. We're basically 2 hours away from lock on the dot with a couple early games and then a few late games here. So you can get into turbo slates, late slates, whatever you want, obviously on DraftKings chasing that money. But 5 out of the 6 top players ownership wise not only come from that Portland-Detroit game, they come specifically from Portland, who I mentioned before. Anthony Simons comes in at about almost 70% of lineups right now. Nurkic, McCollum, Nance, and then DSJ as well, all right there as guys that are expected to be very popular tonight. This game that we're talking about here, despite obviously how great a game we expect it to be just as basketball fans and watching this thing, from a DFS point of view, the most highly owned expected player right now is Steph, who comes in at right around 15%. It's not a big number, obviously. And this is a guy who I think, Chirag, 5 out of his last 7 games, he's gone for north of 55 or so fantasy points. So is that, despite obviously the salary, you got to pay up for him, certainly, but do you expect him to break out again tonight?
What's the definition of breaking out? Because if he scores 60 fantasy points, like I kind of need that mandatorily from 11,400
based on paying 11 for, yeah.
you need that. And it's getting to a point where it's almost contrarian to play him on a short slate, not as much. But if this was 11,500 on a 10-game slate, you could see ownership under double digits on a guy like Steph Curry, who could easily who's dropped 80 fantasy points already this season. So we're getting to a point where the salary, as you can know, like he started the season at 9,400. So like, it wasn't like he just came out and was like, oh, we're shooting really well and we're going to play. Hey, yeah, he did that. 9,400, then 10,000, then jumped right to 11,000. So just the way the salary's been going for Steph Curry, I think he's getting to a point where he could be contrarian, but on a 5-game slate, it's not really that much, but you need 60 fantasy points. So it's not breaking out. He's only breaking out after 70 or 80.
Garion, could you make the argument then to if you're not fading this game outright, and I'm sure plenty of people will, obviously, but if you're not, maybe going to more of a mid-tier guy, stay away from the studs?
Again, look, there's a case to be made that because this is a game that is probably the least impacted by injury news, and it involves two teams that, yes, are incredibly flashy and star-studded, but really make their bones as two of the 5 best defensive teams we have in basketball, that, maybe this is a contrarian game. And maybe if I would never say, as Chirag was alluding to, that Steph would be a variance play on a slate this small, but maybe having a lineup with 5 people from this game, you'd be much heavier on this contest than anyone else. So maybe that's the way to get some variance here, and just hope that this is a high scoring game between two teams that are very capable of that. Hope this is a game that maybe goes to overtime or something along those lines. But, when you're looking at Steph, when you're looking at James Harden, when you're looking at Kevin Durant, when you're looking at LeBron and Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook on this slate, as I sort of alluded to, I mean, it's you mentioned that 5 of the most popular plays tonight are projecting right now to be Portland Trailblazers players. And that's because the most recent news we have is Damian Lillard will not be playing in this game.
Mm-hmm.
We've still got very recent injury news in other spots, but it really does speak to how quickly people will try to move to find the next new value, because the algorithm does try to really minimize the value you can find with some of these guys 1 or 2 or 3 games after the initial injury. But yeah, I mean, when you're looking at guard in particular, like, again, Steph's not a bad play, but I just look at, the value that McCollum has obviously now created for himself. He's going to be very expensive, but Fred VanVleet, you look at someone like Dylan Brooks, just the value created in a situation in that game. I am probably, again, going to be focusing more on sort of the $7,000, $8,000 tiers, as opposed to maybe just paying up for 1 star and trying to find value around that person on this particular slate.
Well, since we're already talking late games, may as well at least finish up with another late game, and that's the Lakers and the Kings. That one obviously is in Sacramento. The Lakers, is close to Chirag's heart. His team, they're a middling club in the NBA so far, right in the 11-11, 3-5, away from the soon to be Crypto Arena or something like that. They won't be the Staples Center anymore. LeBron James is questionable. That's the big one. Avery Bradley is not going to play for the Kings. They are Harrison Barnes is doubtful, so that is obviously notable. Rashawn Holmes questionable. Most expect him to play,
Holmes
but nevertheless
actually expected to play now. He's not listed on the injury report.
Perfect. So all the better. But obviously the big domino there is LeBron. As we know, Chirag, I talk about it all the time. When you don't have LeBron, it becomes a much better night for not only for Anthony Davis, but obviously for Russell Westbrook. He always is the one that seems to suffer when all 3 of those guys are available. So if LeBron does not go, suddenly it opens up things on that end for some of the other stars that you want to think about. But if in fact LeBron does play in this one, how does that alter in any way your approach to this game?
It's really difficult because LeBron has been picking it up. Over 55 fantasy points in 3 straight games, almost 60 in 2 out of those 3. Yeah, the minutes are crazy, and his low point total was against the Kings in this matchup when they went to triple overtime and played 50 minutes. But LeBron has been on a massive tear. But at the same time, every little bit, you see him drive, you see him take a shot. He's a little bit more gimpy, or he'll come up a little limp after a foul or something like that. So I get really scared to like just play him into the lineups, but just the way he's been playing lately is just remarkable. And then the guy that's actually suffered the most has been Anthony Davis to an extent. Yeah, he's still scoring over 50 fantasy points, but that's because he's getting blocks, steals, rebounds, now finally hitting the 3-pointers again. It's not because he's sitting here just dropping points on everybody. Like, his jumper is still a little bit off. And I just think that LeBron is the best option of the three, just because of the way that he's been playing lately. But you have an extremely solid floor with all these players, but they're all over 10,000. So it's difficult, because if you spend for Curry, then how are you going to get to Westbrook? And then on Sunday night, LeBron already mentioned the reports from the Lakers were that he's going to play tonight. Yeah, he's questionable, but they were already mentioning that he was going to play tonight. So I don't think he sits. And the Lakers are in a position where they cannot like take anyone for granted anymore. They've had the easiest schedule in the NBA, and they're not at the top of the league. That really worries me.
So, Garion, something I had mentioned, obviously, when teeing up Chirag there, and it relates to, again, I'm coming back to what things look like right now with regard to potential ownership, because I think it's an interesting thing for people out there potentially, is so you got LeBron he's projected to be 11% owned. Anthony Davis ahead of him actually at about 14%, but then you have Russell Westbrook going all the way down to about 2 or 3%. Which again just speaks to what I was talking about before, that when all three of them are out there, Westbrook, you don't want to play him. It's a contrarian play to play Westbrook when those other guys are available. What do you make of his impact on this team when again all three of the horses, the big three, are out there?
I don't know. I feel like we've talked this to death. Yeah, it's sick.
Do you not want to?
I'm just saying, like, what else is there to say about this at this point? If all three play, it's not quite as good for any of the two. If one sits out, the two get bumped up. They're always going to be expensive. Look, I think the last game they played against the Pistons was really the first time all season, Chirag can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but that all three really had simultaneously good DFS nights in the same game. So clearly it's possible, but it's just not something that's happened all that much lately. Now, these again are two very poor defenses. So I could see this game being high scoring. I don't think we're getting triple overtime again, but if you do want to build around a singular Lakers star, whether that be LeBron James or maybe Anthony Davis, I'm actually surprised to hear that Davis is projected to be the more popular of the three.
Yeah, I didn't understand that either, because I was
with his price point, I would assume. But I was actually going to say that Davis might be a nice contrarian play, just because there's been so much negative media attention around his shooting numbers this week, that in a very soft matchup against a Kings interior that does get better when Rashawn Holmes plays. I do think that's important to note. They are a much better rebounding team and a much better interior defensive team when Holmes is in this lineup.
Yep.
But, maybe Davis could have been the contrarian, but maybe you take one Lakers guy and you surround him with a couple of the mid-tier Kings guys, whether that be Fox is a little expensive for the level of production you've been getting from him so far this season, although the Lakers have been pretty poor against point guards. But, maybe it's a Tyrese Halliburton. Maybe it's a Buddy Hield. Metu at 4-1 is obviously a pretty nice value play, although he's been shooting terribly his last 7 games, but he's been rebounding, he blocks shots, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you fall into a good shooting night from him, but that would maybe be my approach if I wanted to attack this game, is a singular Lakers stud and then surround him with a couple of Kings pieces and really hope this game just blows out.
Chirag, we saw 278 points, I think it was, when these teams matched up last time. Of course, that game went on forever. It was not decided in regulation. Nevertheless, it's a big over-under on the DK Sportsbook, as you guys both, acknowledged earlier, 226.5 points. Do you think we get over that?
What's really funny is that I was watching that game and I was like, man, this is some horrible offense. This game is about to go under. It was like 96 at like, I don't know, like the 7-minute mark or something like that. I remember just thinking that to myself, like, man, what if I bet the under on this game? Like the trend has been to the Lakers are poor defensively. They're letting people score. It happens all the time. But like when it comes to how clogged up these offenses have been, like that's kind of my worry. And so I'm leaning towards the under due to the inflated number.
Garion, you agree? Disagree?
It is a big number. And I would say that this season, if you don't really have a strong lean to the over, you'd be better served just playing the under, because yes, the officiating has seemed to tighten a little bit as of late. We are getting more free throws in some of these games, but it's still just been an under heavy league so far in 2021. So the Lakers also, just going through some stats there, I was trying to see if their defense had suddenly become elite. It has not become elite, but I will say across their last 5 games, they're much more middle of the pack in terms of defensive efficiency. They're 13th in the league as opposed to when they were dead last earlier in the season. So even a slight increase in productivity on the defensive end could help this game get to the under. So I would lean that direction.
Well, guys, Lake Show near and dear to Chirag's heart. Let's go closer to home, literally, for you, Garion, where, of course, the Raptors are going to be hosting the Grizzlies. It's a 7:30 game Eastern time, so a couple hours from now. The Grizz, of course, without John Morant. We know that. He's out indefinitely with the knee for Toronto. Gary Trent Jr. is questionable. I think that's an interesting domino going into tonight, obviously. And then you've got Burge, Dragic, and Anunoby. They are all out. So what do you make of what it's going to look like on the floor here for the Raptors?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting game for tonight's slate. I think that these two teams matched up less than a week ago, or maybe it was a little more than a week ago, but you're looking at two teams right now who across the last 10 days rank second worst and worst in defensive efficiency. These are horrible defensive basketball teams. And this game went easily over the number when these two teams met up in Memphis. Right now, the last 7 Grizzlies games have gone over the number, and the Raptors are 7-2 to the over in their last 9 games. So there is points to be scored, and there's really not like a crazy big salary on either side of this game. So when you're talking game stacks and when you're talking attacking from the mid tier, there's a bunch of guys I like in this one. I think it starts with Fred VanVleet, who has averaged almost 39 minutes per game his last 4 games. And that is not, unexpected. That is very much in line with what he's done so far this season. He leads the NBA in minutes per game. So I think someone like VanVleet, who, not a huge DraftKings point per minute guy, is going to be hovering around 1.1, 1.2 on the best of nights, but he just plays so many minutes. You don't need him to really be more efficient than that. So I would really be taking a look at him, especially considering the Grizzlies give up the second most fantasy points per game to the point guard position. There's obviously some value opened up on the Raptors side if Gary Trent Jr. does not play in this game. Svi Mykhailiuk played 38 minutes against the Celtics on Sunday. Didn't even particularly have a good game, but still scored 32 DraftKings points because he was out there so long. Precious Achiuwa is the only center the Raptors have right now. Had a pretty good game.
He's a viable play tonight at 4,400. Coming really off viable. 30 minutes, like back-to-back games.
Yeah, like he's probably just going to log 30 minutes. The only reason he didn't play 30 against the Grizzlies the last time was because he got into foul trouble, and they had to pull him very early on in that first half. And then on the Grizzlies side, you've got Dylan Brooks, who has a 36% usage rate when John Morant is not on the court so far this season. That guy is maybe one of the most green light shooters we have in this league, even though
seriously,
I don't think anyone's telling him to shoot aside from himself, but he's already one of the most confident guys in basketball. Add in, this is a Mississauga kid. He's playing at home tonight for the first time in 2 years.
Oh, man.
He could have 12 field goal attempts by the end of the first quarter. And I really don't think that's hyperbole. And he's just $7,000. And then, you look at someone who has probably underperformed for most of his career, but John Morant's out. So Jaren Jackson Jr., $6,700. The Raptors, the worst rebounding team in the Eastern Conference the last 10 games. I think Jackson should just be able to own the paint here. So again, it all depends how you want to attack this slate in general, but I really like keying on this game and getting 2 or 3 of those guys into a lineup and building off of that point.
The only other game we haven't talked about, guys, just to make sure we do mix it in, obviously, and then we can circle back with some of the top studs, value, all that good stuff for the people out there watching, building their lineups anxiously, I'm sure. You got the Knicks and Nets, Battle of New York, 7:30 Eastern time. New York is just, it's a fascinating dynamic of what's going on right now. This team obviously has taken a step back from where it was last year. Mitchell Robinson is questionable, as is RJ Barrett, Derrick Rose, Nerlens Noel. They're all questionable, at least the last thing I saw. Maybe you guys have an update. Kemba Walker, it was just announced yesterday that he's out of the rotation. I don't know if that changes if, in fact, half those guys that I just mentioned don't play tonight. But obviously that is an interesting thing in and of itself there from Coach Thibodeau. And for Brooklyn, East leaders, by the way, at 14-6 and all right at home, 6-4. Joe Harris is out indefinitely, much like Kyrie Irving for very different reasons. So what should we expect here, Chirag, especially on the Knicks side?
I mean, with Alec Burks starting, there is kind of an inclination to consider him in your lineup coming off a monster game, 40 fantasy points, played 40 minutes against the Hawks. He was pretty much the reason why they were in that game winning it. He knocked down 4 3-pointers as well. I just think that you could take a little bit of value and consider a guy like Derrick Rose. I think there is some opportunity here to go look at cheaper players. While Brooklyn is projected to win by almost double digits, they have the largest spread on tonight's slate in this game. I think that's the reason why you need to consider a guy like Quickly or Rose, who are not over 5K, because if you look at Alec Burks and you look at his game, you're like, oh yeah, he went off, so let me look at him, he's going to be starting, sure. But that entire offense changes with Alec Burks in the lineups because Randall is there, Barrett's still there, whereas Rose and Quickly coming off the bench, they don't have to really worry about passing the ball now to a guy like Alec Burks if they're playing on the floor with him. So I think Rose and Quickly are more of the guys. I lean towards Rose just because I think he can get up there to like 30 minutes, but Quickly makes a lot of sense as well.
What do you think, Garion?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards Burks. Rightfully so. This is someone who's going to be in the starting lineup, de facto point guard, I guess. Although, a lot of their offense will be run through Julius Randle, as it always is. This is just a really tough game to kind of break down until we kind of get an updated injury report. I mean, I hate to kind of cop out like that, but you've got Derrick Rose with a questionable tag. You've got RJ Barrett with a questionable tag. You've got Mitchell Robinson with a questionable tag. I mean, Burks, in theory, if RJ doesn't play, is a guy who just from like a size perspective can kind of play that tweener role like Barrett does. So maybe he's the one who picks up extra minutes, as Barrett is also kind of a pseudo point guard or a pseudo initiator on this team. Whereas, if Derrick Rose is ruled active, with the sea kind of parting and the minutes opening up, with Kemba moving towards the bench, I agree with Chirag. I think Derrick Rose could be a fantastic play. Maybe he's on a bit of a minutes limit, but it's still probably somewhere in the realm of like 25 to 28 minutes. And we know Derrick Rose can do damage in that span of time. So this is just one of the more interesting injury reports that we have to watch as we get closer and closer to lock. But I think Burks is the safe play, but he's definitely not going to be a contrarian play, is kind of the way to look at the Knicks right now.
That's fair.
We have some news now. We got some news that broke for the Raptors. Gary Trent officially ruled out. Finally have some news on the slate. We've been waiting for it.
Schema Hyluk time.
Is that the most logical automatic play there, Garion?
He's starting.
I mean, yeah, it's just a matter of minutes. Like, even with 2 starters out, Nick Nurse is going to run a small rotation. It's just what he's done all season long. So Mihailouk's locked in to 30 to 35 minutes. I mean, again, we saw he could play as much as 38 in their last game against the Celtics. I don't think he's someone who's going to see his usage rate skyrocket necessarily. It's going to be Fred VanVleet. It's going to be Pascal Siakam. It's going to be Scotty Barnes, but he's going to be out there. So again, like value options on the Raptors, Precious Achiuwa and Svi Mihailouk under $4,500 could be looking at 35 minutes apiece in a game that could be the highest scoring game on this slate. So they're just guys you have to at least consider.
Yep. It's such an interesting slate because of the 5 games that you don't usually get this many value options on a 5-game slate. So that sets up where it's like, okay, do we want Steph and do we want a superstar, where now it makes it very easy to fit McCollum in with all this value.
Do you think people are going to start leaning towards like the double stars and scrubs build? Because it wasn't something I was thinking about a lot this morning, but you're right. There's so much value on this slate now that could turn out to be the more popular approach.
Yeah,
it is true. I mean, we've talked about a lot of these guys, most of them, but some of the great value plays, whether it's, obviously the guys that Garion just mentioned from Toronto, obviously going back to the Portland game, I mean, and all these guys that I'll mention right here, 6K and below. So that's not even including Nurkic, who's in a great spot, obviously, but 6K and below. LaMarcus Aldridge is in a good spot. We haven't even talked about him. Simons, obviously Achua, like you said. Isaiah Stewart, we haven't really talked about him at all for Detroit. Also, Steven Adams, you can make a case for. You can't fit all these centers in, but just great options for you, obviously.
I like Brandon Clark
like
too. I was looking at Brandon Clark at 3,700.
Clark,
unfortunately from Vancouver, so he doesn't quite fit my narrative, but
Brandon Clark's someone to consider. Garion mentioned JJJ as being a viable guy to be able to step up, but there's another guy there where Brandon Clark coming in for Jaren, getting a nice healthy amount of minutes as well.
Well, we've talked about this too. Like, if you want to play a narrative and maybe get some separation from some other lineups, JJJ not exactly the most cautious person when it comes to defense and fouling. It's not unheard of that he gets into foul trouble and that Brandon Clark could be called upon to play 30 minutes in this game.
Do you have in the last couple of minutes that we have here, obviously, and Chirag, I'll start with you here. Do you have give me a favorite stud for tonight as things stand right now? I know things can change. A favorite stud and a favorite value. I'm
going to take the cop out and go. My favorite stud is actually going to be Nurkic. I just think he's way too cheap. And my favorite value, there's so many value options. I mentioned DSJ, I mentioned Precious and all that, but I think that it's just really setting up for a D Rose night tonight. So that might be my value play.
Garion, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked about a lot of these guys already, but I think I'm going to stick to that Raptors-Grizzlies game, and I'll say my favorite stud, quote unquote, not really a stud by traditional terms, but Dillon Brooks. We see a lot of these guys with the high volume, the high shooting volume that doesn't always necessarily translate to huge DraftKings point performances because, you still have to be collecting rebounds, grabbing assists, getting steals. I mean, he's averaged 1.3 DraftKings points in the minutes he's played without Ja so far this season. It's not a huge sample, but that's like elite level production. That's not just a blip on the radar. So I just think at $7,000 with the role he's going to walk into in what should be a relatively close game. I don't think either side is blowing the other one out in this contest. So I just like Brooks a lot. And then let's talk about Svi Mykhailiuk again. I just think if you can pencil someone in for that many minutes below $4,000, someone who's starting too. I mean, that's not the end of the world if someone's not starting, but we just know he's going to play in this game. It's just too tempting to pass up for me in a spot that, again, I just think this game gets really high scoring.
All right. Now, if I'm going to play two just for giggles, I'll stay in that Portland game for the stud. I'll go with CJ McCollum. I think McCollum's, he blows up tonight. And then as far as I'm gonna stay with it. Anthony Simons. Anthony Simons is my value guy at only 4K. I think is in a.
You're thinking that both guards, a potential guard that's going to start or play at least starters minutes, is going to also be the one that's going to outscore 40. You're going to get 40 fantasy points and another 30 from Simons. You're thinking about 70 to 75 fantasy points from these guys.
I think both of these guys will give you the fire emoji in your lineups tonight. That's
the fire emoji is so easy for Simons. Come on, man.
Are we taking down the fire emoji? Oh boy.
Listen, if he doesn't have to go for 40, he could go for 30. He could go for 30 and have a perfectly good night.
For 21 and get the fire emoji tonight.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well,
it wouldn't take a lot.
30 plus. 30 plus. I'm not settling at 20. If you want another, I'll give you another one. How about man, there are a bunch.
Just ribbing you, man. Just messing with you.
No. You keep going. Brad guys, let's go. D Rose too. D Rose. They're a whole bunch. They're a lot. All right. Time for us to go because Bry Guy is, I don't know what Bry Guy wants to do, but it's not this. I know that. And I love the man. So I'm going to adhere to his technical director rules. And our producer, Eamon, we thank them both very, very much. And I thank Glash for letting me, fill his seat on a Tuesday while he fills mine on a Friday later this week. You will have the slate coming your way the rest of this week, every day after the 4 o'clock Madden Sim, right around 5:15, as is the usual time. Of course, the sweat in the mornings, 11 a.m. Garion, Thorne, Chirag, Hira. I'm Adam Kaufman. We thank all of you for hanging out with us. Good luck with your lineups tonight. It's a 5-gamer. Get creative, folks. See you later.